Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider. Today is Monday, October the 7th?
It is the 7th.
Right, the 7th.
Yes,
and it
indeed.
is finally Ole Miss game week. I'm Zach Ewing, joined by Wilson Alexander. He's our LSU football beat writer at The Advocate. We also have LSU, baseball and all-purpose writer Koki Riley with us.
And football.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll call you all-purpose. We can. You're an all-purpose
He's our utility
back.
player.
Yeah.
No.
Guys, it's an exciting week. It's Ole Miss week, and we even brought the big guns, and we brought our utility player in.
Yeah. I'm the Chris Taylor of this podcast. That's great to know.
But like 2019 Chris Taylor, not now Chris Taylor.
Okay, that's good to hear. All right,
Yeah.
We're already like jumping the ship, and we're like 15 seconds into this. Yes, it is Ole Miss game week. Let's get back on track. This is one of the most anticipated games of LSU season. Feels like we've been building up to this ever since the loss to USC. The weather on Saturday should be perfect. We got a nighttime kickoff in Tiger Stadium, 100th anniversary celebration that LSU is going to be sort of doing during this game and in the lead up to this game. And there's just been a lot building toward this game. And one that looked a few weeks ago like LSU was going to have to maybe pull a rabbit out of its hat to win, all of a sudden feels a lot more winnable because of what we've seen LSU do against South Alabama, the way that Ole Miss has played the last couple of weeks in its 2 SEC games. This one can go either way, and it's really consequential for the season as a whole too. LSU's got to win this game if it wants to go where it wants to go this year in terms of making the college football playoff. And that's not an impossibility. You got to play a really good game to beat Ole Miss. You can't play sloppy in any facet. But it is something that LSU can win at home and maybe propel itself back into the national conversation.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, Koki, it feels like season opener 2.0 because we waited all summer for the USC game. And then that was obviously a disappointment to LSU and its fans. And then you had these 4 games where LSU is a significant favorite. They had the one scare against South Carolina, but it just felt like everything was building back toward this point. And now you can say, all right, now we get to see what this Tigers team really is.
Yeah, and the South Carolina game was a really, really close call. And I think the fact that they won that game left a lot of LSU fans relieved, but it also, I guess, re-heightened the stakes of this game because then, almost certainly they would be undefeated, even though we'll talk about it later, but every week in college football, you never know. But most likely they were going to be, win 4 straight games heading into this game because they won that close South Carolina game. Then you combine that with the Kentucky win over Ole Miss, and now the stakes aren't just high for LSU, the stakes are also high for Ole Miss. And it also gives LSU fans a little bit more reason to, I guess, be optimistic heading into this game because Ole Miss came into the year as quote unquote the better team, but Ole Miss also has the worst loss in terms of who has the worst in terms of just if you look at both these teams' resumes. So this has become a really, really huge game and what's going to be a really, really massive week in college football.
Yeah, and I think it's also set up more by the chaos we saw in the SEC this weekend, and really around the whole country, but especially in the SEC with both Alabama and Tennessee losing. So we're going to kind of put that in context and talk about what it means for LSU both this week and going forward in today's show, and also start our preview of the LSU Ole Miss game. LSU Sports Insider is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to discuss some of those massive SEC upsets over the weekend and be back with you right after this.
Experience the convenience and cleanliness that Waste Pro brings to Mardi Gras, LSU tailgates, and festivals with our top-notch portable toilet services. Perfect for large crowds and community events. Join the countless satisfied families and organizers who trust Waste Pro to keep their gatherings spotless and sanitary. Discover more about our services and make your next event a success at wasteprousa.com.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
All right, welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider. We're going to go around the SEC as promised. Today's Around the SEC segment is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, because at Classic Industrial Services, every moment matters. And we usually kind of save this segment for late in the show and just kind of throw it in. Today it is the show in a lot of ways, because the context of LSU-Ole Miss and really the rest of LSU season, the rest of the SEC season, Wilson, has changed. You know, we saw Georgia lose the instant classic to Alabama 2 weeks ago. And then Alabama goes to Vanderbilt and just like shock of all shocks loses to Vandy. Vandy rushed the field. And one of the most striking things ever was how many Alabama fans were in the stands watching Vandy. It was like a road game field rush. It was really weird. And then later that night, Tennessee loses to Arkansas. Everything's reset. There's one undefeated team left in the SEC. It's Texas. And all of a sudden, everything's back on the table pretty much for everyone, including LSU.
Absolutely. It suddenly feels extremely wide open. The last time that there was the last time that there was not an undefeated SEC team at the end of the regular season was 2017. And that was only because Alabama lost to Auburn in the Iron Bowl the last week of the regular season that year. Otherwise, it would have been undefeated, made the SEC championship game against Georgia and all that. Obviously, two SEC teams end up playing for the national title this year in Georgia and Alabama that year. But my point being that this is carnage way earlier than we're used to seeing in the season. And it does leave everything completely wide open. Like you said, Texas is the only undefeated team left in the SEC, and it could lose either of its next two games very easily. I mean, Oklahoma doesn't have a great offense, but that's a rivalry game, neutral site field. And then right around after that, you got Georgia coming to Austin, and then right after that you got Vanderbilt, which all of a sudden it's like, I was joking about this after the
beware the Commodores.
Exactly. I was joking about this after the game. It's like, should LSU be more worried about Alabama or Vandy now? But in all actuality, I think what it shows is what we saw over the weekend. Like these next 7 games for LSU, look at who you're playing. You got Ole Miss, who's a really explosive offense this weekend. You go to Arkansas, who just beat Tennessee, which up until that point looked like a pretty darn good team. It could still be a good team, but Arkansas beats them. Right after that, you got Texas A&M, which is on the rise after it's throttling Missouri, and then you got Alabama, which is a top team. You got Florida, which we'll see, but they beat UCF, right? And then you've got Vanderbilt coming in here, and then Oklahoma. It's just like
there's no gimmies left.
Yeah, there's nothing. There's no gimmies left for sure, and it's a wide open league. And LSU I don't know if it's necessarily like based on what we've seen so far, well positioned to emerge from that. But this is also the kind of year where it seems like anybody could emerge from that, and you just got to play really well week to week to week in order to be able to do that. And so everything is on the table for this team.
Given the amount of carnage that we've already seen, it makes me believe that we could see multiple 3-loss teams make the playoff, because the schedules are only going to get harder from here on out, not just for teams in the SEC, but for everywhere around the country. And I have trouble seeing there being like multiple 1-loss teams in the Big 12 and multiple 1-loss teams and even like the ACC. I mean, Cal should have lost, and that would have been the fifth top 11 team to lose. And
Cal should have won.
Cal should have won. That's what I mean.
Miami should have lost.
Miami should have lost. They were down 35-10. Was it like late in the third quarter?
Did you see the Yahoo Sports article Sunday morning that proclaimed Miami an upset victim because someone had gone to bed before the game was over and scheduled the post for like 7 days? It was awesome. Yeah.
You gotta stay up for the algorithm, man. But anyway, it's setting up to be such a wild season that I just feel like there's just going to be opportunities for everybody. And the more big wins that you can have against quote unquote good teams, the better chance that you have to make it, even if you do have a really bad loss and like 1 or 2 other losses to good teams, right? Because I just feel like everyone's going to have the somewhat similar resumes, and it's really going to be tough to like separate like team 10 from team 14. I think that's what the season is shaping out, if we're living in a world where Vanderbilt can beat Alabama and Tennessee can lose to Arkansas in the same week.
It's got a little bit of 2007 vibes to it already.
Yeah.
Bill Connolly of ESPN I think pointed this out, that the first 6 weeks of that season there were 9 ranked teams lost to unranked teams. Through the first 6 weeks of this season, 8 ranked teams have lost to unranked teams. A lot of that was just this past weekend, but there's going to be a lot more opportunities as we go down the road. And SEC teams really start playing each other. We start getting into the thick of the conference schedule. Same thing around the country. I mean, the Big Ten schedule, it needs to still really pick up. You've got 3 undefeated Big Ten teams right now with Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State. They're going to start to play each other, and these things are going to start to shake out.
Ohio State's
even more
literally playing
one loss.
Yeah, Ohio State's literally playing Oregon next week, the same time that LSU is playing Ole Miss, the same exact time. So like there's going to be a lot of stuff going like that around stuff like that going around the country. So,
and I mean, it's funny if you think about this. Just turn your brain back to the 4-team playoff era. There'd probably be a little bit of panic around the SEC that if Texas doesn't make it, the SEC may get left out. Everybody's already got a loss. They all play each other. I mean, a lot of them are going to end up with 2 losses. But given the 12-team playoff era, okay, so 2 things for LSU. Number one, as you said, Wilson, it's wide open now and they have a chance. But also, as you pointed out, a lot of these teams that looked a lot better than we thought are on LSU's schedule. Arkansas, which that one wasn't as surprising as Vanderbilt, but it was surprising to me in that when you're watching that game in the first half, and Arkansas had like 22 minutes time of possession and just kept settling for field goals. In fact, I think they were only up 3-0 at halftime.
Or screwing up on 4th and 1s and 4th and goals.
They were turning the ball over on 4th down. They were missing field goals. And you're like, okay, if you're going to pull an upset, you have to take advantage of those opportunities. And they didn't. And so I just sort of assumed Tennessee would come back. And they did. And they took the lead. But Arkansas was able to pull it out. So LSU, right after this game, as you mentioned, Wilson, road trip to Arkansas and Texas A&M. Texas A&M just absolutely, as my kids would say, they dog walked Missouri. I mean, just took them to the woodshed, right? They look like they could be a CFP contender now. And then Vanderbilt's not a CFP contender, but if they could beat Alabama, they could. You certainly can't ignore Diego Pavia and company when they come in here in November.
No, you can't. I mean, and I think that's what this weekend showed us is whereas you came into this stretch of the schedule thinking, okay, you got to be able to beat Ole Miss and Alabama. Well, now you really, over this next 4-game stretch, it's going to be a lot tougher than maybe I think us just like watching LSU anticipated it being. Although you knew like going on the road in the SEC to Arkansas and Texas A&M were inherently difficult because of playing on the road in the SEC. Now those games look even more imposing, especially I think A&M. Arkansas has been really inconsistent. It feels like they have a ceiling that they could reach that's probably higher than this. They even played a bunch of that game without Taylor Green, but they keep they pushed Oklahoma State to the brink on the road, and then but then they win this game, but then they had some other really head scratching games. So it feels like what version of Arkansas are you going to get when LSU goes up there? But either way, okay, like you said, we kind of said earlier, there's just no gimmies on this. I mean, other than it's kind of funny. Maybe the only one is it's not even a gimme, but the only one where you feel comfortable about, I think, is Florida.
Yeah,
and it's but even then you have to go to Gainesville. So it's just
Florida's won a couple games and they've got talent. I mean, you don't. Again,
you can't. And LSU, as we've said all season, is not the kind of team where they can just sort of roll the ball out there and they're going to win. Like they've got to be on their game for a full 60 minutes. We saw them finally do that mostly against South Alabama. They just got to continue to do that going forward because every game left in the schedule is going to be difficult in some kind of way. And also, though, it makes for really exciting next 2 months because if LSU can stay in the thick of the playoff race, then going down the stretch here, it's going to be fascinating because it's just going to be a wild season. Like the rest of these next 2 months could be really, really entertaining.
Yeah, and let's transition into that and whether that makes LSU Ole Miss even a bigger game. But first, I want to let you know today's episode of the LSU Sports Insider is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, proudly serving Louisiana and the entire United States with metal siding and roofing, steam and electric tracing systems, industrial and commercial coatings, and general maintenance services. From large capital projects to commercial projects or your small quick response needs, Classic Industrial is your go-to for quality and safety. They're not just about business, they're a proud community partner supporting local initiatives and helping build a stronger Baton Rouge. Because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. Also want to encourage you guys to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Help us grow the channel. Share it with your friends. Hit the bell for notifications, all that stuff. We go live twice a week. Also going to have a post-game show for you from Tiger Stadium Saturday night after the Ole Miss game. So join us for that, and we'll show your comments live. We record these, so if you leave comments, we don't see them until afterward. But if you leave comments on that one, we'll show them live, and we'll talk about them. So that'll be a lot of fun. So my question, guys, LSU Ole Miss seemed like a big game, is a big game. is it a bigger game after what happened this last weekend?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think it's any bigger than it already was. This was already a huge game. I don't think that it's...
Can't turn it up to 11.
Yeah, no. Maybe if they had both ended up in the top 10 of the AP poll, it would have generated more buzz or something like that. But like either way, I think this is just a huge game, and there really wasn't... I don't think anything changes that or even heightens it. I don't think it's heightened in any way.
I think Ole Miss had to beat South Carolina just to maintain the hype, and they did. So I guess it didn't go down at all from after that Kentucky game. So I think the fact that Ole Miss lost to Kentucky, it has that when that happened 2 weeks ago, that heightened the stakes. I think it just sort of stayed there. I can't really think of another thing that would have taken another step after that, if you know what I mean.
Well, the only reason I say that is because right now, there's only three. We mentioned there's only one undefeated SEC team. It's Texas. There's only three who are undefeated in SEC play. That's Texas, LSU, and then Texas A&M, which is actually 3-0 already in the SEC. So, the winner of this game kind of stays in the SEC race, and the loser, particularly if it's Ole Miss, is probably out of it. Well, I don't know. I mean, at this point, maybe a 6-2 team in the SEC does get into the SEC title game.
Well, that happened, 2 years ago when LSU made it in 2022.
Heck, we might get a 3-loss team at this rate. I'm telling you, things are just that crazy. Because all it takes is, Alabama's got a tough schedule. I know Texas is undefeated right now in conference play, but they have a tough conference schedule. All these teams have such tough conference schedules that I don't know who's going to end up with, how many, just 2-loss teams are going to be there at the end of the day. Probably 2. I guess the math just has to work out in a certain way, right?
I'm not sure. Yeah, you're asking me to pull up all the schedules in my head at one time on the fly. I'm not sure, but
it's possible that a 3-loss team could be in the top 2 of a 16 team.
No, exactly, because we don't have divisions.
Yeah, that's almost mathematically impossible.
But I don't. That's you're right, probably mathematically. But I could see 2-loss teams just playing each other.
Yeah, that could happen.
Yeah.
I think at this point we all still think Texas is really, really good.
They still have to host Georgia.
But yeah, they still play Oklahoma, as you mentioned. They still play Georgia. They still go to Texas A&M on Thanksgiving weekend. So which now looks like an even juicier game. I mean, it's pretty crazy out there. So let's focus in on LSU, and we're gonna have a full preview pod on this on Thursday with Scott Rabelais and Reed Darcy. But LSU's had this bye week. Wilson, they played their most complete game right before the bye week against South Alabama. What do we think they worked on in the bye week? And we usually do a keys to the game segment. We're going to call this a keys to the bye week segment, and it's proudly sponsored by Associated Grocers. Join our team and support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. But if you were Brian Kelly, what would you have had the Tigers working on?
A lot of it was, it's going to sound kind of boring, but a lot of it's fundamentals. Especially in the secondary, a big thing that this team's going to need to do well against Ole Miss and moving forward against everybody else is leveraging the football. If you're playing outside leverage, or inside leverage, either one, making sure that you're in that right position to be able to make plays on the ball, because that was a thing that Kentucky did really, really well against Ole Miss. Its corners leveraged the football well, and it was able to just play really fundamentally sound defense. There wasn't a lot of missed tackles from Kentucky in that game. They were also... especially on the perimeter. Their tackling on the perimeter was fantastic. Kentucky, Ole Miss kept throwing a bunch of quick throws out to Trey Harris, their star wide receiver, trying to just get the ball to him in space and let him work. And Kentucky just kept making tackles. And it was in such stark difference, especially watching this from an LSU lens, to the way that LSU played against Ole Miss last year, where it was missing so many tackles against Ole Miss, in particular that extended drives on third down, and really led to that, just defensive disaster. LSU's tackling, I think, on the whole has been better this year than it was last year. It's not fantastic, I don't think yet, but it's better. And LSU just needs to continue to work on those sorts of things, because the recipe for beating Ole Miss can be distilled down into stop the run, because that makes this offense, that's what gives the offense tempo and rhythm. And if they're working behind the chains, they just seem clunky. That's kind of always been the recipe against the Lane Kiffin offense, at Ole Miss in particular. And so if LSU can stop the run and put them into third down, that's the other thing, is getting off the field on third down. Ole Miss, over its last 2 games now, is a combined 4 for 23 on third down.
Wow.
They were 1 of 10 on third down against Ole Miss, and they were 3 of 13 on third down against South Carolina.
The first one against Kentucky.
Yes, thank you. Getting all my names here jumbled. And that's a huge piece of this game. LSU's third down defense has actually been pretty good this year, especially compared to last year. Like, they made a big leap in terms of third down defense last year. A lot of it is that's when they tend to bring pressure. That pressure has gotten home more consistently. But they also are going to need to be able to, if they can get off the field on third down, which again was like a huge issue in that game last year, because they were missing tackles, they couldn't get off the field on third down. Then they can give their offense more possessions. And that's the thing. You really got to play complementary football in this game, I think. South Carolina didn't do a very good job of that. Kentucky did. They played really complementary football by just, even though they didn't score a bunch, like keeping the offense on the field, limiting Ole Miss's possessions. And if you go about those things, then, you can kind of, that seems to be the recipe for beating this Ole Miss team and for limiting what it can be a very explosive offense. And so, I don't even necessarily remember what your question was at this point, but I think it's. But just to wrap up, like, that's what you got to work on in the bye week. Like, you got to be able to execute those things, and so I think you got to really be able to play fundamental football. Like, the secondary is what it is. It's not a super talented secondary. You don't have those 5 stars back there and that kind of stuff yet who've turned into stars. But you got to be able to play sound, fundamental defense in order to be able to, make pass breakups and tackle. That's the big thing, is tackling. Because if LSU can tackle well in this game, then I really like its chances.
That was coaching press conference filibuster worthy. That was great. You took the question where you wanted to go with it. You answered the question, and then you just took it where you wanted to go.
I've watched a lot of coaches' press conferences over the years. I guess I've picked something up.
You guys are going to Brian Kelly's press conference in like an hour, so you're like warmed up for it now. I mean, it's great.
Should we filibuster Brian Kelly?
But seriously, and Koki, curious to see if you have anything else or if you just completely agree. But I think you're right, because these offenses, Ole Miss, and you could throw Tennessee and the way they looked at Arkansas in this too, there are nights you watch them and you go, how does anybody ever stop that? Right? It's just big play after big play, wide open spaces. Run game works, pass game works. They score 60 points. How does anybody ever stop that? But the key to it is if you stay in your lanes, you play fundamental. It's really funny because they're kind of these new age spread offenses, and the perfect counter to them is old school football, where you stay in your lanes, you tackle well, and you stick to your assignments. Because if you do that, you keep these offenses from snowballing against you, where they're fast paced, your defense gets tired, your head is spinning, you don't know which way to look, and all of a sudden that's how the big plays happen. Unfortunately, Koki, and again, if you have something else to say about the bye week, go ahead. But if LSU has had a weakness on defense, that's it.
Yeah, and if you think of the Ole Miss offense and you watch them play, there's 2 things that stand out. It's pace and it's space. They create a lot of space by putting the receivers basically on the opposite sides of the field, and they just create a lot of space formationally, and then they play with a lot of pace, which we've talked about a little bit already, and the fact that everything's no huddle. It's play, and you just have to be able to communicate really well. You have to be able to leverage the football really well, and you have to be able to tackle really well. And that communication key is very, very important. I just wanted to mention that along with all the other things that you said, because you have to be able to communicate quickly and clearly, just so everyone knows what they're doing on every single play, because you're not going to have time to sort of regroup and huddle and prepare for the next play. And I think the running game part is really, really key, because the running game is how they stay in front of the sticks, and you have to stay in front of the sticks in order to go no huddle, right? Because you can't really go no huddle. It's on 3rd and 10, So I think all of those things are going to be absolutely huge in this game, and like you said, Zach, that's been kind of the weakness of this LSU team so far, and that was that they did a good job of sort of fixing against South Alabama, so at least there's some evidence of it. But South Alabama ain't Ole Miss. I know South Alabama scored 87 points against Northwestern State.
Turned around and lost to who did they play Saturday? I can't remember now, but they lost on Saturday.
Yeah, they did lose on Saturday too. So they're not Ole Miss, right? So it's
clearly
gonna be it's gonna be like a I don't want to see it. Yeah,
Arkansas State, they lost 18-16.
And that's not Arkansas. That's Arkansas State.
Arkansas State actually isn't horrible. They gave Michigan a game, and
okay.
They have some but everyone's given Michigan a game this year. But anyway, that's way beside the point. But this Ole Miss team is 2, 3, 4 tiers above the team, the South Alabama team you played, and great, you played well against South Alabama, and you did all the things that you needed to do from a communication standpoint, from an organization standpoint, from a do your job standpoint. But that's just only going to be heightened times 10 against a team like Ole Miss. That that's their strength is putting you into a blender and mixing you up.
And to that point, the thing that I thought LSU did really well against South Alabama that it hadn't done well earlier in the season was ignore eye candy, pre-snap eye candy, like motions and that kind of stuff, things that are designed to get them out of their spots, which is what led to some of those big bust touchdowns, especially against South Carolina, as I think we've mentioned on the podcast before, like that Lenora Sellers touchdown run that was set up by pre-snap motion where the defense just flowed toward it and left the middle of the field open. They didn't. That was what we said that was Blake Baker's emphasis all week going into South Alabama was having eyes in the right place. And you asked Brian Kelly a question about this last week that I'd like you to recap here in a second, because it was really, I think, a lot more interesting answer than I expected him to give on it, frankly. And then it was also really important for this defense and what they needed to work on in the bye week, because Ole Miss can put you in a blender, like you said. They got to have their eyes in the right place. They can't be looking too broadly. They got to they needed to continue to work on that in the bye week. That was I think that would have been a big thing as well.
I'm glad you mentioned the word broadly, because that's sort of what Brian Kelly sort of harped on in that answer, right? It was making sure to narrow the focus of all their defenders, especially the linebackers, right? Where instead of he even talked about this with Harold Perkins after week 1, right? Where the game, everything, his viewpoint got too big, and that includes everything, right? That includes the distractions you're hearing from the crowd. That includes the eye candy that's going back and forth the line of scrimmage. That includes having all these different things in the back of your head that may or may not happen, instead of just concentrating on the thing that you have to do and the assignment that you have on that play. Because if you just concentrate on the assignment you have on that play, someone else is going to take care of the eye candy in case the eye candy actually becomes real candy, for example, right? Yeah. So as long as but if you have the running back, you're concentrating on the running back, you're not concentrating on the wide receiver who's motioning on the other side of the field. So that just using a theoretical example. So I think if they can keep that focus really narrow, and they have a really good shot of having a pretty solid performance in this game. And if you look at the 2 times they faced Ole Miss in this Lane Kiffin defense, it was the first time they faced them. They did a really good job defensively, especially in the second half and really the last 3 quarters of that game.
Are you talking about just like over the past 3 years of like a Brian Kelly team?
Yeah, Brian Kelly
playing
team playing against Lake. We have 2 examples, and one example was a veteran defense that has been through the trenches, that had a veteran. They didn't have the most talented group, but it was a lot of transfers, a lot of guys who knew how to do their jobs and could narrow their focus, and it resulted in a very good defensive performance. And
Harold Perkins was also unreal that game.
Yeah. And because they narrowed his focus that whole season, they narrowed his focus.
Get ball, yeah.
Exactly. So, and then last year is the opposite of that, where it's a lot of younger players, it's a lot of guys that are going in and out, and there's just not a lot of experience. There's not a lot of there was a lot of guys who were just playing. Their focus was way too wide, and I think heading into this game, we're going to see which side of this defense they're closer on, right? Are they close to the team that they were last year? There's a lot of the same players, but those same players are more experienced because of what they went through last year. So again, I'm very curious to see, and we don't really know for sure how that's going to turn out in round 3, where they have the similar personnel that they had last year, when it was a disaster, but they have more experience, and they have more experience, maybe not as much experience as the team 2 years ago, but they're closer to that team in terms of experience than they were last year. Does that make sense?
It was another good filibuster.
It was. But no, it's a fascinating discussion. I mean, I think the point is, it is an advantage for LSU to have been coming off their open date, where South Carolina not only had to play, but they had to go. Ole Miss had to play, but they had to go on the road to South Carolina after a loss and kind of the emotions of that. And so that's an advantage for LSU. Now, it's one thing to say that and say, hey, just be fundamental, stay in your lane. It's another thing to do it when you talk about that eye candy and you talk about the speed Ole Miss has and the pace they play at. Can you stay in that from play 1 through play 70 or whatever? Well, are mistakes? They're not going to shut them out. Like, mistakes are going to happen, but well enough to win the game. That's really the whole point. That's what we're going to find out. So, Tiger fans, Associated Grocers is hiring. Join a team committed to the success of independent retail grocers. Apply today at Associated Grocers and be part of something great. Got a couple of LSU, I don't want to call them housekeeping items, but news items, including recruiting to talk about. We're also going to steer this discussion back to LSU-Ole Miss, and since these guys won't be on the Thursday pod, maybe get a couple of quick predictions from them before the end of the show. First, we're going to take a quick break and let those guys think about that.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. I'm feeling more alive these days than I've ever been.
At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional health care for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
You gave me love.
Since 1988, Classic Industrial Services, Inc. has led the industry in specialty contracting. From thermal insulation to scaffolding, coatings, and beyond, we cover it all. Every minute matters in our commitment to quality and safety. We're here to serve with roofing, siding, heat trace, and refractory services. Visit classicindustrial.com for more information.
All right, welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider. Today's show is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic, your trusted healthcare provider in the heart of Baton Rouge. Whether you're in need of primary care, specialist services, or urgent care, the Baton Rouge Clinic has you covered with a team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. And guys, one bit of news kind of away from the scope of this season is that is in recruiting. And today's recruiting segment is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic. The news is that Jakheen Stewart, star defensive end from Edna Carr in New Orleans, who's considered the top player in the 2026 class, according to 24/7 Sports, he's reclassifying to the 2025 class. Obviously, he's in LSU's backyard. LSU, by the way, already has the number 1 player in the 2025 class, according to 24/7 Sports. So now they're going after. I haven't seen the new rankings. I don't know where
I got him for you.
Stewart. Oh, you got him. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, even though he's reclassified, so this is a guy who, right now would currently have been in his junior year, is still now in this senior class, according to going off the 24/7 Sports composite here. So it's a compiling of all the recruiting
24/7
rankings.
On 3, Rivals,
ESPN.
all that.
Yeah.
ESPN. Yeah.
18th nationally, the 3rd ranked defensive lineman, the number 2 player in Louisiana, a still 5-star recruit, even though he is now like a year ahead of where he would have been. This is to still be ranked that high even after reclassifying is like what we saw out of, not quite the same, but close to like what we're seeing with Ryan Williams in terms of like he reclassified to move to enroll early at Alabama and was still an extremely highly ranked player. That's like kind of what you're getting here, where
It's
like
this
this is
your
still
12U baseball player goes and plays in 13U and still dominates, right?
Exactly. And so, this is a 6'6", 270-pound defensive lineman, and the guy who LSU really needs to land in order to close out this recruiting class. One that has already been something where it looks like, man, is this 2025 class going to be the thing that really sets up LSU for long-term success when you talk about having Bryce Underwood and Harlem Berry and some of the other really highly rated players that they've got in this class. Stewart needs to be the one that they land here. He has said, I think he told On Three's Steve Wiltfong that he is going to sign in December. And so you basically got 2 months here to recruit this guy. He's reportedly going to take a visit to LSU for the Alabama game in November. But LSU's also going to be, going up against Miami, Ohio State, Texas, I think USC too. He's got, this isn't going to be easy to get him to land him. But this becomes now like, for Bo Davis and the rest of this defensive staff, like this is pretty much priority one, because not only is he a top Louisiana kid, he's at a position of need. LSU has added a few defensive tackles already in this class who are verbally committed at this point, but he would be like the biggest of them all if they can get him in the fold, because that's the kind of thing where, I mean, they call him Thanos. Like he's a guy who you need to get in the building and start to develop and be able to get on the field, because it's at such a critical position.
Well, Wilson, this is why you hired Bo Davis, right? This is why you gave him that big contract so he could leave Texas to come back home to LSU, and this is how he earns his big bucks. He gets big name recruits from Louisiana on the defensive line and makes sure those guys stay here and develops them into first round picks. Like that is essentially the reason why Bo Davis is at LSU, and again, like this is his time to shine, I think, as a recruiter, and it's just absolutely massive for all the reasons that you said. Even though this LSU class is already, one of the best that they've had in recent memory, it could be even better now. There's a chance for the ceiling to be even higher now with this Jakheen Stewart news.
Yeah, and I mean,
he would be like the 4th or 5th 5-star that they get in the class, depending on where you look.
And to me,
it's like some guys aren't 4 stars here, then
some guys aren't 5 stars there.
That's what I mean.
Yeah,
I don't want to I don't want to minimize the importance of a position, but if you want to get those 5 stars, you want to get a quarterback, which they did in Bryce Underwood, and you want to get these hosses on the line, right? That's what you want, and
in a corner because of this team's needs, and they have one.
If you're gonna compete, this is what big picture what all LSU fans want, and I'm not saying anything anybody doesn't know, but if you want to compete with the Alabamas and the Georgias and eventually meet them or surpass them, and I guess we got to throw Texas in there too now, you got to get these kids, particularly when they're in your backyard. Mm-hmm. And Jakheen Stewart's just an hour and a half down the road in New Orleans. It's a big one. It's a big one. But if you continue to get those kids, you might say that catching the Georgias and Alabamas and Texas, you might say it is inevitable. That was a Thanos joke. That was a Thanos. I set that up. I'm glad. For a second, I was worried it didn't land.
No, I
landed for sure.
Okay, time to move on from that. We're going to do today's Star Player segment. It's proudly sponsored by Waste Pro. Ensure your tailgate or event is a hit with clean and convenient portable toilets from Waste Pro. Rent yours today. I'm thinking of another.
The only problem is that you didn't snap at the end.
Yeah, I thought about that. I'm gonna refrain from any more dad jokes here. Okay. Okay. My question for the Star Player segment is: I think it's pretty much a consensus that in the first 5 games of the season, LSU's breakout star has been Caden Durham.
I wouldn't have said consensus.
You don't think consensus? Okay. Well, who do you have?
Okay.
I mean, my breakout player, it's sort of obvious, but Garrett Nussmeier.
Okay. That's fair. I guess I knew he was good. I didn't know he was this good.
Yeah.
Caden Durham,
yeah.
I barely heard the guy's name, and all of a sudden now he's like their best offensive skill player. It's like,
yeah, I understand what you mean. I mean, he's had an incredible start to the season, but like LSU wouldn't even be like Garrett. It's like you said, Garrett was a known player, but going through this as a first-time starter, now already being one of the best quarterbacks, looks like in the country. I mean, he's one of the best in the SEC, and statistically, he's one of the best in the country right now. And I think talent-wise, just what he's kind of passing the eye test, even further than statistics, I think he's playing really, really high-level football as one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And so, yeah, mine's Garrett, just because he had to go and pass that test, as a first-time starter, and so far he's doing that.
I agree with you guys, but I at least want to mention Braden Swinson and Savion Jones, because those guys have given them an ability to pressure the quarterback with just 4 guys, at least on occasion. And that's something that I didn't think this defense had in its bag heading into the year necessarily. I thought maybe they could get there, maybe optimistically, but it seems like they've kind of gotten there with those 2 guys in particular. And I mean, all credit that goes to Kevin Peoples for that. I'd say at least a lot of the credit goes to Kevin Peoples.
And the players themselves for
that's what I mean.
Yeah, like for taking that coaching and growing as players, because they have been really good.
So who is your candidate to be the breakout player of the second, I guess, half of the season?
That's where I would probably say Caden, because he's like shown some ability, obviously, like his speed and all of that, where I feel like this second half of the year he could start to like take over a little bit more. He's had basically like 2 really, really good games, and against South Carolina and then against South Alabama. And so now I feel like, okay, if he's emerged now as RB1, if his foot injury is not something that's going to keep him out for an extended period of time, which we just don't know yet. Hopefully we can get some clarity on that going into this week. I I think becomes someone who over the second half of the year becomes much more of a breakout player for me.
I think a safe pick is Whit Weeks.
I was about to mention him if he counts.
Yeah,
he counts.
I think he counts because his playing time is only going to go up from here on out. They need him to make plays. He's been making plays already to start the season, and you could argue that I don't know the fact that he basically slides into the Harold Perkins role, and he's the closest thing they have to a Harold Perkins type, really speedy linebacker who makes plays. I think he's in a really good position to be a sort of breakout guy. But if you want like a darker, like a more of a sleeper, like a more of a dark horse pick, sort of like the Caden Durham thing at the beginning of the year, Dominic McKinley.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Just because I think he's going to get more opportunity for playing time. I don't think he's going to necessarily play like 50, 60 snaps in games, but like I no defensive tackle really does. But like, you know what I mean? Like 30, like more than 30. Like,
But if you
in
make
the 40s.
an impact on 5 of them,
I think he can
change the game.
I think he can make an impact on 5 of them if he only plays 20. And we already know that he's another one of these 5-star guys. They did a fantastic job of bringing him in last season, despite all the sort of the havoc they had at that defensive line coach position.
Can even flip from Texas A&M.
Yeah, and now he's healthy and he's starting to play a little bit, and he had a sack the other against UCLA. So I think there's a chance that he plays more, and just given his talent, he's a dark horse candidate for a question like this.
It's interesting. I think everybody agrees LSU has to play better if they're going to go where they want to go this year. Like, they haven't played well enough so far. But individually, you look around the depth chart and you think, man, they got some sleepers there and some talent there. And I mean, the pieces are there to where if they can put it all together, it's not just Ole Miss. This October stretch now looks very difficult compared to what it did, because at Arkansas looks more difficult. At Texas A&M looks much more difficult. I mean, this is not going to be easy. And then, of course, you follow that up with Alabama. So that's a good point in the discussion, too. And as I said a couple times, we'll have a complete LSU Sports Insider preview of LSU Ole Miss coming on Thursday. But we do want to kind of start that now as we wrap up our show. And we're going to do that with the Queen of Baton Rouge's LSU Sports Insider sports betting segment with Thomas Casale. Experience the thrill of game day at 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails, your premier destination for elevated sports entertainment. Ole Miss is favored by 3 points. That is different than it was in the summer, but it's also different than it was a week ago. So lots of kind of line movement, and Thomas is here to tell us about it.
Hey, everyone. Well, LSU coming off the bye week and Ole Miss coming to town. I've had this game circled since the summer. I think this is the game for LSU. If they're going to compete and do what they want to do and fight for the college football playoff, they have to win in this spot. Now, the line is interesting. Early on in the summer, LSU had opened up as a 1.5-point favorite. But now, Ole Miss, -3 on the road in LSU at DraftKings Sportsbook. So the money has come in on Ole Miss early, and it's pushed the line to 3. I don't know if it's going to get any higher. I actually think some money is going to come back on LSU, and 3 is obviously the key number. So if you like the Tigers, I would take the 3. Don't risk getting 2.5, because it's going to be a close game. One edge LSU has in this game. Ole Miss, this will be their 7th straight game to start the season. LSU coming off the bye, could be rested. I lean the Tigers early here, but I'd want the 3 or higher. If it's 2.5, it's a no bet for me. So bet it now if you're gonna be on LSU this week.
All right, thank you, Thomas. So that's pretty interesting discussion around the betting line. I think it just goes to show you that maybe not everybody knows what to think about this game. Not everybody knows what to think about LSU. And after the last couple of weeks, not everybody knows what to think about Ole Miss. Tiger fans, you can catch all the sports action at the Queen Casino's DraftKings Sportsbook Bar and 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails. With top-notch screens and live betting, it's the ultimate spot to watch your favorite teams and enjoy a cold brew or signature cocktail. The Queen Casino is the only land-based casino in Baton Rouge and your go-to for game day or any day. Visit today and elevate your sports watching experience. So just to end this show and let it kind of roll over into Thursday's show, let's talk a little LSU Ole Miss. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. And Koki, during the last break, you were talking about how you think there's an aspect of Ole Miss that doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah, I think you could definitely make the argument that this defense, at least they've played better than this offense. I don't want to say maybe the whole season, but for a lot of this season. And if you just go heading into the year, you're like, oh, the defense will be good enough to match how excellent the offense is, and they're going to be able to play great complementary football. Now it's almost like the defense it has taken the lead, and the offense is along for the ride, at least so far through SEC play. And it was Ole Miss's defense that kept them in the game against Kentucky. Granted, Kentucky doesn't have a very good offense.
No.
Same goes with the South Carolina game, but they also held South Carolina to 3 points. Like that was a very impressive performance, and South Carolina was healthy on offense. Lenora Sellers was playing in that game, so I just feel like this Ole Miss defense is really excellent, and they were missing one of their starters in that South Carolina game as well, and they were dealing with some injuries here and there, and that's something that we're really going to have to track throughout the week. By the way, a lot of the Ole Miss injury stuff. I mean, Trey Harris is dealing with some injury stuff.
He played against South Carolina though. Just for anybody to know, he was like on the injury report going to that game, and then he ended up playing.
I thought he got banged up he might have got banged up during the game too. But then I made Princely Human Mielin, one of their better defensive ends, was out for the South Carolina game, and Walter Nolan got banged up during the South Carolina game. So like they have a lot of little nagging injuries that we have to keep an eye on, but that's kind of a separate point to what I'm talking about when it comes to their defense. And their defensive line has been excellent this season. It's probably been one of the better defensive lines in the entire country, and they have enough talent in the secondary. They have Trey Amos, who's a Louisiana kid at that corner spot, an Alabama transfer or a former UL player as well. So I feel like defensively, they've been. I mean, I don't think they gave up a touchdown. I think they gave up one touchdown through the first 4 weeks of the season or something like that. Like they've been as good as advertised defensively, and even better. And obviously, they're really well coached on that side of the ball as well. So I think this is going to be probably LSU's biggest challenge so far in terms of a defense that they faced against this season. I think LSU's offense was fantastic against South Carolina for the most part, besides obviously some of the big mistakes
once it got
in that
going,
game. Once it got going, especially. Yeah. But really, if you think about that game, like after those first 3 drives, like they were able to move the ball pretty consistently from that point on. And that's a really good South Carolina defense that also kind of proved its mettle against Ole Miss last week when they gave Ole Miss a lot of short fields, and they still only gave up like 27 points, and part of that was because of a punt snafu and like a turnover. So like I just really think that like this is going to be a really tough challenge for LSU's offense, even though I do think LSU can put up some points in this game if they play up to their potential offensively.
Yeah, it's forgotten about the defense, but it's difficult to play defense when your offense plays that fast, because you're back out on especially your offense goes 3 and out, you're right back on the field. Sometimes there's no TV timeout. I mean, people don't think about that, but a defense can get winded so quickly, especially your pass rushers, that to play that level of defense with the offense Ole Miss likes to play is pretty impressive. And it does, I think, change the conversation on this game, Wilson.
Yes, to Koki's point, too, I mean, South Carolina averaged 3.5 yards per carry in this game. They rushed for 151 yards. As we know, as any LSU fan would know, I think, having gotten ready to watch LSU South Carolina, that was a South Carolina offense that wants to run the football, and it had some success doing so, especially against LSU. And Ole Miss really limited them on the ground. Like you said, there was a lot of short fields. There were some turnovers in that game that really put South Carolina behind the 8 ball. That'll be obviously another big piece of any game is turnovers. LSU's got to make sure it protects the football in this game. But to your point also, I mean, through Ole Miss has now played 6 games, and they are first in the country in rush defense. They're only allowing 63.67 yards per game, an average of 1.79 yards per attempt. Which is absurd.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about holding somebody under 4 yards per rush, and that's good. I mean, their rushing defense has been really good. Obviously, the first 4 weeks of the season, it wasn't like they were really playing super stiff competition, but they have been able to continue that during SEC play. And so, going back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, what do you got to work on during the bye week? LSU's got to make sure that its run offense can complement what they want to do through the air. It seems like they found out their identity offensively is going to be throwing the football, is going to kind of be a big part of it, but you can't win SEC games by just doing that. You got to have some balance. Yeah. You got to be able to run the ball. And, we're really going to find out whether or not it seemed like LSU had made some strides over the last couple of weeks in areas in terms of running the football. We're really going to find out against Ole Miss is that real or not? It'll be interesting to see right off the bat, is Ole Miss stacking the box like Brian Kelly said teams were doing early in the year against LSU and making it so that they needed to throw the football. They weren't getting good, favorable run looks. That'll be something to watch early on in this game. If LSU can move the ball efficiently, and that's because that's another piece of this on offense. We saw in both the Arkansas-Tennessee game and looking at the Kentucky-Ole Miss game, you made a point earlier that I wanted to bring back up about teams are playing in some of these upsets some old school football. Time of possession in both of those games was actually like a really big deal, which is not something that over the past, 6-7 years, people have been like, time of possession, whatever. It doesn't really dictate who's going to win a game. It made a huge difference in those games. Kentucky dominated time of possession. So did Arkansas over Tennessee, keeping these offenses off the field.
I mean, Vanderbilt, they were on the field for 42 minutes, and Alabama was on the field for 17.
Yeah, well, Alabama scored to make it 40-35. There's like 3 minutes left, 2:50 maybe. And Vandy didn't give him the ball back. I mean, that's not easy to do when the other team's trying to get it back.
And LSU's going to have to be able to do that. Pick up third downs, pick up conversions in short yardage situations. I think their short yardage run offense was hopefully a focus of the bye week because that's something that hasn't been great this season. And so if they can do that, then they can continue to put themselves in favorable positions against Ole Miss. Because that's the other thing. Ole Miss hasn't played an offense I think as good as LSU's yet.
Yeah.
So the defense has been good, but their defense is going to be tested just like LSU will be.
Yeah, I've been waxing poetic about Ole Miss's defense, but they haven't faced anyone half as good offensively as LSU, honestly.
Classic step-up game for both sides, right? I mean, this is the best team either team has played all year. They've both stumbled once, and so that's where we are. And like I've been saying, we will have the full preview podcast on Thursday. Reed Darcy and Scott Ravelay will be here, and they will give their predictions. But I did want to give you guys the opportunity. It's only Monday, still 5 days to game day, so you can pass if you want. Do you have an early prediction on Saturday night at Tiger Stadium?
I'll let Koki go second because I don't. I know that's a total cop out. Boo! But I just don't have it
on Saturday morning.
Yeah, exactly. I'll make one later this week in the paper. I just don't. I need to see like some of those injury things, how those shake out. I want to kind of let all that sort of percolate for a few days, kind of before I
and that's
make up
totally
my mind.
Fair. And Advocate.com. And the Advocate on Saturday morning will have the predictions. But Koki, you said you're ready.
I'm ready. Although the injury stuff does make me pause a little bit, but I think if Ole Miss is at least relatively healthy and they have Trey Harris at least offensively, I think they should be able to win this game. Just because I don't think the South Alabama game is enough to convince me. And the bye, which is helpful as well, obviously. I don't know if that's quite enough to convince me that this defense has fixed a lot of the focus issues that we've been talking about, like eye candy stuff, and that only gets multiplied by the tempo and the pace that Ole Miss plays at. So if you put all that stuff into consideration, it's a little scary if you're an LSU fan, and that combined with obviously the fact that Ole Miss's defense is capable of keeping down this LSU offense to at least a respectable number. It's a tough matchup for LSU.
I'll just add this. I don't think that LSU is going to give up 55 points and 706 total yards of offense this season, but that basically LSU is still going to have to score a bunch to win this game.
And
but I just don't think it's going to be historic like that.
I don't think they're going to score. It should be lower scoring than last year. We're all comfortable saying that. We'll have our complete preview pod on Thursday. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications so that you're ready to go when we're up on Thursday. You can read all these guys' work at theadvocate.com and in the Advocate print edition. Get our newsletter, advocate.com/newsletters? We don't even have the URL anymore. Search for it. Advocate newsletters. We've got an LSU in. I think it's actually the advocate.com/LSU Insider, I believe is what it is. We'll tell you on Thursday. Anyway, for Amelia Cotton, our producer, he's Wilson Alexander and Koki Riley. I'm Zach Ewing, and we will talk to you next time on the LSU Sports Insider.